And the first one is going to be from Natalie Serebryakova, who's a staff cloud engineer, also enjoys working on building and automating various tools over at Altruist, where they help development teams be more productive, more happy. Sort of the things that motivate Natalie at work is sort of the fast-paced, team orientation, creative environment. There's always new challenges and stuff. And occasionally they speak at conferences and on blogs and things, and they're going to introduce us today to estimating the cost of disaster recovery and the disaster recovery process of cloud resources. So take it away, Natalie.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Natalie, and as was already presented, I am working as a staff cloud engineer currently at a financial company. Previously, have experiences at other different companies. Excuse me, I think my slides are. Yeah. So today we're going to talk about how to estimate cost during the disaster recovery processes, right? And this talk will be specifically for cloud resources. So let's just dive in straight there. As I said, my name is Natalie. I work as a staff engineer. So just want to have a short notice that all the numbers in this presentation are made up. They're not affiliated with any companies. They're not real data, so just used for examples. And let's start here. So as I said, going to talk about cost estimation. We're going to cover a real example in terms of how we can start estimating the cost during this disaster recovery, how we can maybe select the proper strategy based on the cost. We also will understand if there is option to optimize the budget once the strategy is decided, and how we can do it, or how we can start doing it in the company. So what is cost estimation? Basically, cost estimation is the process of forecasting expenses. Every expense in the company, I'm going to cover only expenses associated with the cloud services. I will cover, for example, 4 months. But obviously, there are other different resources that your company might use. Could be different third parties, other supportive tooling, and all this should be covered by the cost estimation once you decide on the strategy for disaster recovery. And when we are trying to estimate the cloud costs, what kind of things or costs we should consider? So I'm not going to cover what is cloud disaster recovery, but I expect that people who use different cloud providers, could be AWS, GCP, Azure, Alibaba Cloud, there are so far a good number of them. All of them have kind of these categories are defined in the compute, storage, network, cloud-specific services. Sometimes your company might use certain licenses for things like potentially SQL databases, right, or some other products. Support, like every cloud cost might come with the support, right? Not when only services are down, but sometimes when something is not clear or just usual day-to-day operations or good practices. Support is a good thing to have, and it's also part of your cost. Usually, when you use certain cloud providers, can vary, depends on the package you have or agreement with the cloud provider. And obviously, data retrieval. Data retrieval is pretty hard to cost estimate these days because it's very, in a certain way, might vary, as well as it's hard to measure it sometimes when you, for example, have a multi-cloud build infrastructure or other things, but it is possible, and there's always a way to start doing that, to at least get a basic estimate. So the goal of this whole thing is not just to get the precise number, but just to start understanding what is my cost. So the tools used, usually every cloud provider have certain pricing calculators that are available for every user, maybe at certain cost, maybe for free. Cost management tools are pretty easy to find, third-party tools available on the market and things like that. You can build your own tooling. So your own tooling can be simple as just a terminal. For example, my company uses AWS. AWS provides something called quick site dashboards. They're pretty precise. So disaster recovery strategy are familiar we are familiar with them, but how do we start selecting the cost estimation rate? So decide on a disaster recovery strategy. There are different types, as I said, and in my assumption example, I'm going to select two of them, which is backup and restore and multi-region failover, right? I assume that my total cost of the month is $10,000, and let's see what can I allocate in like 10 or less than 10 steps. So first, as I already identified my strategy, I decided on my resources. So I'm trying to pick between two strategies. So I did estimation for my resources, which is certain compute, certain storage, and I decided for some SQS queries. On other hand, when I select certain cost, there are certain formulas everyone can use. This is available, where I decide on certain resources, how much of them I want to use. Let's say in this scenario for backup and restore, I use 2 instances of this type, and in the multi-region failover, I use 4 instances of the other type. How did I decide that? Except from how much it cost, there is also something called cost factor. So cost factor usually is a helpful formula that help us to allocate resources for our specific strategy. We use percentage for that, which is, as I said, it should not be a precise number, but it should give us an idea how much we will spend or we need to budget for a specific resource. And that cost factor will be later adjusted with our overall budget for our entire AWS, for example, cost. So, for example, in this exercise, I will say backup and restore will consume 30% of my AWS resources, and I assigned it like 0.3 or 30%. So this slide is covering cost factors, right? Resource utilization, complexity. You need to think about business criticality. Sometimes it could be financial institution where it's very important that you will be always online, that nothing goes down. Sometimes it could be something like social application. Then if it goes down time to time, it's not such a big deal. I know the users will be unhappy, but overall, it's just for business to decide what is critical, right? There is risk tolerance, which is RTOs and RPO. I'm sure it will cover it already by this conference. There is historical data. If you have chance to get all your historical data and analyze it, look back how much was the spend, analyze that, bring it to this cost factor exercise. Operational cost, obviously, how much you spend on certain things like monitoring, support, data transfer is pretty much, as I said, interesting part and deserves its own talk. And different budget constraints, which is the most important, that your budget and your disaster recovery budget are kind of, proportional. And then in my example, I have this backup and restore, and I have a multi-region failover. And this slide kind of tells us what I decided to do. So resource utilization is moderate and high, complexity is low and high, business criticality is medium and high, risk tolerance is moderate. And I decided that in the end, cost factor for backup and restore is around 40%. But cost factor for my multi-region failover, if I would go that route, will be a 60%. And then I simply can calculate and estimate my cost. So basically, for my allocated strategy, let's call strategy A, my total cost is multiplied by the cost factor I decided, gives me these numbers. On the bottom of the slide in the example, you can see for first one, it's around 6K, and for the second one, it's approximately 4K. And then you consider your operation cost. For this example, I said, let it be $1,000. And data transfer cost. So I'm not going to dive into this whole interesting field, but for this example, I picked it's 200 and 800 just to make my life easier because it's a short talk. But this slide, actually, if you get a chance to have your hands on this presentation, you can see what this is presenting. Sometimes if you have, as I said, multi-cloud, if you're using different cloud providers, how possibly they can charge for different services, for different data transfers. So for transfer in, most of the time it's free, but there are constraints. Please go to the pricing list of the cloud provider, find this information. For data transfer out, that's where all the unknowns come in. And honestly, from the tooling I use so far, not every tool gives this like best transparency. Excuse me. I didn't find the one I like, so that's why I'm not recommending anything yet. Maybe I'll build my own one day. Budget and forecast. So this was step 8, the final step where I was trying to get. So I got my 6K, which I define as my factor, my 1000K for operation cost, my data transfer I said is going to be 200, so total 7,200 and 5,800 is for these two strategies. And here is the result of this short talk and quick assumption that everyone can do right on a napkin. Basically, I still not over exceeding my budget, which was 10K in both cases. And for everyone who start doing this, let's say you did this and like, what do I do next? And I would say start reading, start diving into resource and right sizing. First of all, make sure your infrastructure is in the code. It's easier to see it this way, apply automation. The life becomes easier. If you're still doing it manually, don't. Schedule scaling. Auto scaling, there's a lot of tooling these days. How can you do it? I would recommend if you use multiple environments, shut down the ones you don't use. Just don't let those resources hanging around. Tagging is a whole other field, which is pretty cool. And I think it helps a lot when you start understanding how your resources are calculated, what is used by which team, for example, or which application. Obviously, do the reserve instances, try to pay upfront if you can. So this slide is covering tagging strategies. I would say for disaster recovery, just create their own tagging strategies. I know there are certain tags you can do. Different cloud provider lets you do that. There is a cost estimation tagging. For disaster recovery, just tag the resources that are used for that. And then if you have a cloud provider, let's say you have cost service to track that, collect all the tags and see approximate is your budget and estimation match it what you're actually spending. Most likely the first time it will not, but eventually if you start applying tags and using tags analyzing for cost tracking, using the proper infrastructure as a service, start adding tags there, you will get to the point when you pretty much will see transparently how much you are spending on disaster recovery and is it the right strategies, it makes sense to even use it. So this is the summary. Start cost analyzing your resources, start doing resource optimization. With infrastructure as a code, it's super easy to set up different automation strategies, even prevent you engineering from doing something wrong if certain, for example, tags not exist or this pull request exceeds certain budgets. All this is possible with tooling which already exists in the market. Traffic routing is a field that I feel like deserves its own interesting topic and talk. And cost efficient storage is these days, with my experience, is really underestimated. We do use a lot of data. This is the world we live in, but there are different strategies how you can save money on that. So thank you so much, everyone. How did I do?
Thank you so much for sharing. Super, super appreciate it. Keeping control of one's costs obviously is important for any business. And certainly in the current macroeconomic climate, it should be a subject of great interest and importance to everybody. So thank you very much, Natalie, for sharing with us.